Monster Hunter Wilds just got released, and that is very exciting. And I know, if you take one scroll look on my page, you wouldn't guess it, but I used to play Monster Hunter quite a bit during the PlayStation 2 era. But my hunting days are over, unfortunately. It's a combination of burnout of the formula and the fact that when I was a kid, I enjoyed such games a lot more than I do now. Tastes just change over time, I guess. For better or worse, of course. Yet I always look at Monster Hunter fondly, and like a true sports fanatic, I am rooting for its success whenever I can. But with Wild's release, a certain familiar hunger did find its way back to me. Problem is that I don't want to disappear from my channel for 2 months, as Monster Hunter would take over my life again, so thankfully there's a game that gives me a Monster Hunter experience while keeping my daily adult life intact. Of course, I am talking about Monster Hunter Stories, a spin-off series in the Monster Hunter franchise, and one that people talk fondly of as well. And ever since Monster Hunter Stories 2 has been released, I have been looking for a reason to get into. Or maybe a bit of an excuse, who knows. So yeah, let's dive into it and see what Monster Hunter Stories is all about. Monster Hunter Stories starts us off with a prophecy that speaks of a legendary rider who drove back the Black Blight decades ago and brought light and peace back to the world. But the Black Blight would return, and when it does, the next chosen one would arise and bring back light and peace back to the world again. This prophecy is of course a self-fulfilling one, surrounding your character who starts off as a rider student, eagerly trying to become a full-fledged rider together with her or his friends. Of course, on this journey the Black Blight returns, even a monster corrupted by it attacks the village, and from that moment on it becomes clear that, as the prophecy has foretold, a rider has to rise up and fight back. It's a plot that is very on the nose from the very beginning, and it presents itself in almost a childish fashion at times. Character interaction, events unfolding, art style, lessons and topics discussed in the plot are all very light-hearted, not that very seriously presented, and even a little bit cartoonish. Which in my opinion is a very good thing, as it immediately creates a clear difference between the main series and the spin-off games. However, the main shtick of the story, that being the chosen one, weighs down the story quite a lot. As it's spelled out from the very first second of the game, you are mostly waiting for the moment that the characters will realize what you already concluded from the start. What is worse is that this is everything the plot is about. There's no further growth, change of the world, or stakes or more added on top of the initial story set up, making the story very one-tone throughout your entire playthrough, and normally I really don't like this. Not only does it make it feel like the plot doesn't take itself seriously, but it also makes the characters themselves look silly or dumb, because they seem not to be able to add up the simplest things they are presented with. Now, normally when this kind of things happen with the story, I really dislike it, and it's not just in games but in all media. But it's thanks to this game's goofiness and the art style itself that made me a bit forgiving towards it. You can even argue that these aspects complement the cartoon style story. But the main reason I was able to bear with this story was that it does not get into the way of the game itself, and therefore the fun, which usually is the case. On top of that, the game itself still has its moments. Again, its goofiness made me laugh at times. Some moments were really cool, and the lessons it tries to teach, like making bonds with creatures rather than just hunt them, are good. And around the time the story starts to conclude, I was actually invested enough not to just enjoy it, but to take it seriously. And that's all thanks to this game's presentation. Especially the art style did this. It pops up immediately, and despite it being a remaster, it captures a very classic art style with many colors and vibrant atmospheres. Personally, I would like to call it the DS look/vibes. Not only because this game is a remaster of the same named DS game, but this overall art style was very common on that platform. And it's just great that they managed to incorporate it so well here in the remaster. But despite that, it's just sad to see that besides voice acting being added to the story, itself got left behind in every other aspect. Now, I'm not saying that Monster Hunter always had these deep, philosophical, well-written stories, heck no. But a better or more additions to the story would have been a great improvement, and a remaster is the perfect place to implement it. Though, realistically, we all know why we play Monster Hunter and what the series is known for. It's gameplay. And while here in Monster Hunter Stories, the gameplay is a lot different from the rest of the series, it still does make the same impact on the game. If you've ever played a Monster Hunter game, you know how it works. It's all about hunting down monsters, use their loot to make better weapons and armor so that you can hunt down even bigger monsters. And you use their loot to make better weapons and armor, only to face off against even bigger monsters, and the cycle goes on and on and on. In Monster Hunter Stories, it is a little bit different. It's about bonding with your monster, recruit them, train them, see them grow, and, well, kill monsters. And with that loot, of course, you make better weapons and armor to face again against bigger monsters. And well, you get the gist. The formula is more or less still the same, but with a huge side element of fighting alongside your monster added on top. The main thing to keep in mind in the end is that in this Monster Hunter game, you play as a rider, not a hunter. Meaning that you are comparable to your monsters or your opponents rather weak. So you take on a more or less support role for your monster by giving it buffs, heal, and occasionally join in for an attack. This makes, of course, your monster the heavy hitter in battle. However, you have not much control over what it does. It just goes its own way and you have to trust on your friendship that it would do the right attacks. Now, attacking in this game is where the fun begins, as it's basically playing rock, paper, scissors, with giant monsters attacking each other. Each combat encounter more or less becomes a guessing game, especially in the beginning where you don't know what movesets each monster has and what its pattern in attacks might be. In the end, whatever you pick will result in damage, but depending on targeting and winning this rock paper scissors game determines how much damage there will be dealt to both parties, and if it's special attacks, which one will be used and which one will be blocked. Getting the upper hand in these head-to-head moments with monsters is of course what you want. If you pick the attacks that beats the other, you will do the most damage and take the least. And that is something to get used to be honest, because despite playing well, it's still a trade-off of damage in the end. Only when you and your monster use the same attack and get the win in this rock paper scissors game, you will negate any damage the opponent can deal. But getting to that point is not in your control, as again your monster will do whatever it feels like. And therefore it's not rare that in many moments you will just join it with the same attack with a little bit of hope and faith for the best. Now let's say you and your monster get the best. You do a couple of good attacks, win head-to-heads. Well, in that case you will gain a lot of bond points, which serves as a form of stamina to do special attacks or to mount your monster. Of course, mounting your monster will give you full control, and if you keep up winning head-to-heads while mounted, you can unleash your monster's full power. Now, in terms of how great power-ups can feel in games, hopping on your monster is one of the best, and truly feels like a game changer, especially during boss battles. Cause remember, your character is the weakest link in combat encounters and get easily destroyed by most monsters. But when you ride your monster, you not only take no damage, but you also have full control of it, meaning you can consistently win head-ons with your opponent, dealing massive damage. And then you can top it off with an ultimate attack, which deals even greater damage, but more importantly, the animations of those ultimate attacks are just great. They are badass or goofy as hell, but both fit in perfectly with the atmosphere of the game, and I truly just loved them every time I saw them. But, and it's a very big but, you can ask yourself, is it a good idea to have a combat system that is heavily based on RNG or educated guesses? Well, obviously no. And yes. Yes, in the sense that it sometimes creates great moments where you guess correctly what attack would be coming. A sort of satisfaction of outplaying your enemy. Or even sometimes heroic moments where you just decided to tag on with the attack of your monster, even though you are in a tough spot and really don't know what you should do. But then it turns out that that was the correct choice. And not only do you win the battle, but you snatch the victory out of the jaws of defeat at the same time. Which is just awesome. But I will be honest, those moments don't happen that often. Maybe at the start of the game you will feel a degree of satisfaction, but as the combat is the biggest part of this game, you will get an attitude towards winning or losing the RNG fight system as if it's just another day at the office. You can win, you can lose, at some point your win rate will be higher and sometimes lower. However, around endgame this attitude will slightly change, as a larger, more annoying feeling is added onto it. The combat system will evolve as you progress through the game, but unfortunately, that only goes for your opponent. As you will face larger monsters, they will suddenly have multiple skills and gimmicks that will outclass you almost immediately. Especially the frenzy mode many monsters can enter, ruin the fun of combat. As you're chipping away at a large monster's HP bar, it can enter a frenzy, which not only gives it a damage buff, but also 2 attacks in the same turn. Meaning that it completely negates the idea of winning hands on, as in the same turn it will deal at least 1 time max damage or successfully deals a special attack without any possibility for you to stop it. Cause unlike your opponent, you can't attack twice in the same turn. You can't do skills to block it, and you can't change your character's build to protect yourself from that much damage. I had a couple of encounters lost because the opponent was able to pull 2 attacks in a single turn, and both were focused on my main character, making me lose lives faster as ever, while at the same time making me feel a little bit hopeless, as there was nothing I could do about it. The one thing that you can do in such situation is grinding, getting to the point you outlevel every monster you face so that the damage you take is very minimal. Which, okay, you can grind your way through these encounters, but it does remove the gimmick of the combat and removes the moments of satisfaction when you win encounters by educated guessing. And because of this grind, I lost most of my interest in the combat near the end of the game. Cause after those losses, I decided to just grind my way to success rather than playing the game, making sure my monsters could tank everything the enemy could throw at me, while at the same time dealing a lot of damage. It even made me skip on a large chunk of endgame that you unlock after you completed the game, as I was just burned out by the grind, and it didn't feel like fighting against the unfair advantages of the opponent and the lack of abilities to fight it. Yes, I know I could grind past this point as well for the endgame, but I just didn't see the point in doing so, because if I would, the combat would just feel mundane, and I wanted to end it on a high note. The most exciting aspect and the one that carried the game for me was taming and collecting the monsters themselves. Now, people might instantly drift towards comparing it to Pokemon, which is fair, but I would say this game is more like Dragon Quest Treasures. Though I will say something similar that I said in my review of Dragon Quest Treasures. I wished Pokemon would have taken notes from games like this, cause this old DS game does collecting and usage of your monsters a lot better than recent Pokemon games. To tame a monster, you gotta go in and fight your way through a monster's den until you reach a nest. There you must take an egg and bring it back home, but you must be quick cause the parent monster might be guarding its nest or is absent but can return at any moment. Or worse, it's sleeping right on top of the nest itself, meaning you have to sneak up on it and grab an egg as fast as possible. Now, just like with the combat, there's a degree of RNG involved with this. You don't always know which monster is in the egg until you open it. On top of that, the eggs can have a different level of quality, which determines the monster's base stats. Now, you do have a companion that will give you hints if an egg you grabbed is good or not, but in the end, it's still RNG. Later in the game, you do get more control on which monster you want to steal eggs from. During combat encounters, you can use an item that might make the monster you are fighting retreat to its den after the fight. Once that happens, you are guaranteed to get the egg of a specific monster, but you still have to get it, of course. I will be honest, I'm not a big fan of having monsters with a variation of base stats that is determined by some RNG rarity. The idea is to tame and bond with these monsters, and last time I played a similar game like this, my experience was a bit muddied by such mechanics. To combat this, I made a personal rule which basically boiled down to stick with whatever first version of each monster you get, and doing this made a much better experience. I understand that for multiplayer and endgame, this might not be the best tactic, but those are two aspects I didn't care for at this point. It was fun to just collect new monsters, each giving their own name and finding ways to utilize them, which for most of the game was a lot of fun to do. Each monster has their in-world ability that can help you with movement, finding resources, or fighting monsters, or chasing them away. Some monsters have very gimmicky skills like finding honey, which suits their character for sure, but shouldn't be given much more thought after that. Abilities like that I just absolutely love. The gimmicky ones or the useful ones, it doesn't matter. They are just fun ways to explore the world, but also to give characters to the monsters. And I absolutely love the fact that each monster could have a use in your party. And as a Monster Hunter fan, you can get your all-time favorite monsters together and make your perfect personalized team without any problem. However, the game does decide to also somewhat ruin the world exploration aspect later down the line by introducing flying. Now, flying is useful, but I would say it's too useful, and it removes any connection with the world. You avoid all combat encounters and resources, and the overall feeling of exploration just completely disappears. In the end, Monster Hunter Stories has some great ideas that I absolutely love. Heck, I feel a little bit ashamed that I never found a DS copy of this game when I was a kid, because I know for a fact I would have absolutely loved it back then. Probably even more than I do now, because as I grew older, I became a little bit more critical. And the biggest critique that I can give Monster Hunter Stories is that it has some great ideas, but that it has some very rough edges, and it lacks a depth to it to keep it interesting for a long period of time. In small burst playing sessions, it is a little bit more interesting, but even then there will be fatigue settling in. But despite that, I will call Monster Hunter Stories a fine game. Yes, it has its rough edges, but with the right attitude towards them, you can get past all of them easily. Of course, I wish the game didn't have these rough edges, that the story was a lot better and that there was a deeper layer of depth to the combat, taming creatures and exploration, but in the end, I didn't mind the lack of depth either, as it did not get in the way of anything, and it was just a lot of fun to be had with this game. And on that base, I would recommend this game. For people new to Monster Hunter or novice to the series that are trying to find a footing in it, I would highly recommend playing this game, as it is Monster Hunter but slightly different. Different tone, idea of combat and the story, but it still captures that Monster Hunter vibe quite well. And if you're a Monster Hunter fan and you haven't touched this game yet, I would highly recommend considering doing so. The age of when the game was made and for the platform it was created is very noticeable, but considering designs of the older Monster Hunter games, that shouldn't be much of an issue really.